tonight we are fondly calling this God is forgiving, so I am forgiving. Okay? Um, and so since we talked about forgiveness on Sunday, yes. Oh, a couple in the sound booth back there. Um, we decided that what we would do is touch on the things that Amy really wished she had had time on Sunday to teach on, but just can't get it all in one sermon. And so, what we're talking about tonight is the practicalities of forgiveness, the how to forgive. Because it's easy to tell somebody that's new to something, just go do it, right? You tell your 4-year-old, just go tie your shoes. You know, takes 3 seconds per shoe. Go do it, right? But until they learn to do it, they'll tie it. And what happens the first time that after you teach somebody how to tie their shoes? What happens the first time that happens? Right? Within minutes of them getting done. How's that? How do you do it? And it instantly comes undone, doesn't it? They tie it and they go running off and it instantly comes undone. The number of eight-year-olds whose parents still have tie shoes for them that are running around with shoes untied, right? That's kind of the way forgiveness is, right? Just forgive them. Okay, I forgive them. And I turn around, and as soon as I turn around, that forgiveness came untied. All of a sudden, I'm remembering all over again. I remember what you did. I forgave you, but I'm going to get you, right? So, forgiven but not forgotten, right? Memories like an elephant, all those good things that we think about. So tonight we're going to talk about the practical and biblical picture of what forgiveness looks like and how to do it. All right? So we're going to start off with the definition, okay? So forgiveness is the release on the. And this is kind of a long, the proper definition, if you will. So it's kind of long and wordy, but we're gonna read through that and then we're gonna break it down. So forgiveness is the release on the part of the creditor or the offended party of any expectation that a debt will be repaid or that an offender will receive punishment for the offense. Okay, I'm going to stop right there for a second. All right, so we're going to break that first sentence down a little bit. Okay, forgiveness is the release. Okay, if you are bound by a contract and you get a release, what does that mean? It means you're not bound by that contract anymore, right? You are free and clear. If you have a do not compete clause at your place of work, and when you leave, if they release you from that, you can go across the street and work for their direct competitor, and there's nothing they can do about it, right? Okay? So it is the release of that. We'll get back to release in a little bit. On the part of the creditor or the offended party. Who is that? It's the person that needs to forgive. Okay? So it's the creditor, right? The one who is owed the money. Or the offended party, the one who is wronged. Okay? So this is specifically to the person who has every right to expect what is due them. Okay? All right, so it's the release of any expectation that the debt will be repaid or that the offender will ever be punished, basically. Okay? So here is my simple forgiveness phrase that goes along with that. Okay? Forgiveness is giving up my right to retribution, retaliation, or reimbursement for something that I think was wrong. Okay? Absolutely. Forgiveness is giving up my right retribution, retaliation, or reimbursement for something that I think was wrong. Okay? And we're talking about forgiveness of actions here, okay? The 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 complex definition also talked about forgiveness of debts, right? Um, I know for myself, I have had people who owed me money that I just said, you know what, this money is not worth the strain that it's going to put on our friendship. Forget about it. Don't even ever give it another thought, and we're good to go. Okay? I've also had the reverse happen to me. And so, um, you know, he who is forgiven has much that they need to forgive as well, right? So, so now we'll go on to the second part of that complex. Any questions on that so far? Like, what does that make you think about? You think about forgiveness in that light. I'm just assuming you're all still mulling it over, okay? Okay. The definition is the easy part, right? Yep. Yeah, it's easy to say, "Oh yeah, I just give up my right." Okay? All right. So let's look at that at the second half. So, when describing the removal of an inappropriate offense in this way, the removal does not condone the behavior or suggest approval for the offense. Okay? This kind of gets into what forgiveness is not. All right? Forgiveness is me giving up my right for what the retribution or the justice would say. Okay? That's my forgiveness. I am giving grace, not expecting justice. Okay? What this last part of this says is it does not mean that I'm saying they are in the right. Okay? Somebody hits my kid with a car. There is nothing I'm ever going to say that's going to ever indicate that they were in the right. Okay? Now my kid may have been doing something stupid or wrong when they were in the street, but you know, moms and dads, it's like I don't care what they were doing. You hurt them, right? Okay? Um, if somebody breaks your window, you know, they were in the wrong. However it happened, they were in the wrong. We had a house in Pasodum. It's our house that we dubbed God's forgiveness house, because that was the house that we bought that we really should not have. We pushed that door open, and God said, "Okay, have fun." I was in working. We had guys in doing HVAC and carpet. I mean, there was all kinds of people working in my house that day. And our neighbor was mowing, and we had like this tiny little space between our houses, and he was right up against what was I will loosely call landscaping. And so he was going along there, and his discharge was pointed at my house. All of a sudden, something flies through my kid's bedroom window, through the hallway and into the bathroom, and hits the wall on the inside of the bathroom. And there's people up and down that hallway 10 times in the last 4 minutes. And I was like, what the world was that? Went and found it. It was one of those 9-inch stakes that they use to stake down the plastic edging. His mower caught it and threw it into the house. So I was a little hot, not just because it was July, but because I was nerved up. I'll put it that way. Went out, and fortunately, I had like 45 seconds to kind of calm my tongue while my nerves were hot. I said, "Hey, you just shot this through my window." He said, "What are you talking about?" So I showed him the hole in the window and the thing that threw out. It all ended up fine. We ended up being good neighbors. But, boy, nothing that he did put him in the right. And me forgiving him didn't ever say he did nothing wrong. So some people, they think, oh, I received forgiveness, so now I'm in the free and clear, right? Have we ever had people like that? It's like I forgave them, and they go off and about their merry way. That's not what forgiveness is. So, and we'll get to that in a little bit down here when we get down to the parable. So, all right. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the pattern of forgiveness. All right. This is taken from Matthew. There we go. I had to find the book. Matthew chapter 18, starting in verse 15. Now, we're going to see some verses in here that we don't tie to forgiveness. Okay? But everything starting from even before Matthew 15, this is the part where the disciples come and they say, "Hey, who's going to be the greatest amongst us? Who's gonna be, numero dos after you?" Right? And it goes into Jesus, telling about forsaking the 99 to go after the one, and some of those parables. And so now he's here talking specifically about forgiveness. All right. So we're going to start by talking about the pattern of forgiveness. And this is starting out with the problem and the protocol of forgiveness. So starting in verse 15. If another believer sins against you, go privately and point out the offense. If the other person listens and confesses it, you have won that person back. Okay, I'm going to stop right there. I do process analysis as part of my job, and I have for decades now. And so when you look at a business process, you always start with what we call the happy flow. Okay, the happy flow is the flow that everything works exactly like it's supposed to. There's no deviation from the plan, and the end is where you're supposed to be. Okay? You go to the person, "Hey, you did this to me." "Oh, you're right. I'm sorry. Would you forgive me?" "Oh, yeah, I forgive you." "Hey, we're good buds now." Okay? That's the happy flow. All right? Verse 16 is what I call the road bump. Okay? So verse 16, "But if you are unsuccessful, take one or two others with you and go back to them again, so that everything that you say can be confirmed by 2 or 3 witnesses. If the person still refuses to listen, take your case to the church. Then, if he or she won't accept the church's decision, treat that person as a pagan or a corrupt tax collector." All right? Now, we all remember Matthew, who was a tax collector, invited Jesus over to his house, had other tax collector friends with him. Zacchaeus was a tax collector. Come meet my friends. And Jesus was ostracized because he was with these tax collectors and notorious sinners. Okay? Is the way that the Bible describes them. Notorious sinners. So, so you're supposed to treat them as those people. So when I call this the road bump, it is that I've started my process. I went and I talked to them. Okay. There are decision points now in process flows. So I come along. I ask for forgiveness. The question pops up: Do they forgive you? Yes or no? And if sins against you, you confess them, or you ask them to confess, and they won't do it. Okay, I had to switch my brain of thinking, and they say, "No, I didn't do that." Okay, So the decision number one, did they confess? Yes or no? If no, now I have a split in my process. So I'm going to go down. I'm going to go to two more people at the church and say, hey, I have this issue. I'm trying to get it reconciled. I'm trying to reconcile with this brother or sister, and they're not having any part of it. So they go with you, and you try again. And then you come back to that decision point again. Did they confess? Yes or no? If they did, okay, you're back on your happy flow. You end up in a good spot. If not, now you're coming up before the whole church. Anybody ever see anybody brought up in front of the church? Okay, I haven't. Okay, and I've been, active in church leadership for a long time. There are people I thought should have been, but that wasn't my decision to make. Okay, but yeah, I haven't seen it, and I think we don't see it enough. I've heard of the abuse of that, but can you imagine that level of accountability? Just out of curiosity. All right, so that is the problem and the protocol. Okay, somebody did something against me. I have my protocol of how I'm supposed to act. All right. So we're going to go to verse 18. All right. So this is the power of the pattern of forgiveness. All right. Verse 18. I tell you the truth, whatever you forbid on earth will be forbidden in heaven, and whatever you permit on earth will be permitted in heaven. Okay? When we think of that verse, what context do we put with it? Another way that it said, whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. What context do we typically think of for that verse? We think about prayer, we think about intercession, we think about spiritual warfare, right? Okay? This verse, and this happens in two different places in Scripture, and I'm just talking about this one right now. Okay? It may happen more, but there's two that I could think of. But this one is smack dab in the middle of forgiveness. All right? So if I loose forgiveness on earth, what does that mean is going to happen in heaven? My forgiveness is going to be loosed in heaven. If I bind forgiveness, in other words, I hold on to stuff. I'm not forgiving. What does that mean that happens in heaven? It means no forgiveness, right? So that's the power that comes from the pattern of forgiveness. All right. The next thing is prayer. All right. In forgiveness, there's a pattern of prayer. Verse 19. I also tell you this: if two of you agree here on earth concerning anything you ask, my Father in heaven will do it for you. Stop there. Okay? The power of prayer happens in tandem with other believers. Okay? You'll also notice, how many did Jesus say you should go to that person with if they first deny it? You should take, you should go together as two or three to that believer. Okay? Again, he's talking about the power of prayer, but he's also talking about the power of forgiveness. Okay? You're going in you're praying in tandem with people. You're asking forgiveness in tandem with people. And in that time of prayer, there is power. Okay? So verse 20, we're going to talk about the presence in the pattern of prayer. All right? So verse 20. For where two or three are gathered together As my followers, I am amongst them. I am among them. Okay? So where 2 or 3 gather in agreement, they pray in agreement, I go to ask forgiveness in agreement, he is in your presence. Or we are in his presence, however you want to look at it. Okay? The last part is the pardon, okay? Verses 21 and 22. Then Peter came to him and asked, Lord, how often should I forgive someone who sins against me? 7 times? No, not 7 times, Jesus replied, but 70 times 7. Okay? This is actually a reference back to Genesis chapter 4. Genesis chapter 4. A man named Lamech or Lamech, however you want to pronounce it. Okay? Lamech happened to be the first polygamist that's mentioned in the Bible, and the second murderer. Okay, so he doesn't have a real good rap. Okay, he's known as kind of not the greatest of guys. All right, so Lamech comes home to his 2 wives, and he says, "This young guy attacked me, and I killed him. And if Cain, if anybody that killed Cain was dealt with 7 times for that murder, for killing him, anybody that murders me will have to pay 77 times." Okay, this is called the law of Lamech in theological circles. Okay, and 77. When in our way of thinking, we're always thinking very concrete, right? 77 is the number after 76, preceding the number 78. Okay? It's 66 times or 66 after 11. I mean, you can go on and on, all right? 77 is just 77 to us. But in biblical times, numbers had meaning. Okay? The number 7 was the symbol of perfection. Okay? It was a number of perfection. Okay? Number 10 was the number of completion. So when Jesus said 70 times 7, it wasn't 490. It was this idea of the perfect completion completed perfectly. 70 times 7. And it's if anybody wants to look it up, it has a name. Septuagint. Septuagint. All right? And it just refers to the repeating of 7s. And it means to perfection, indefinitely, or without limit. Okay? And so I've always heard he doesn't mean to count 490 times and that's how many times you forgive, right? He meant just keep forgiving them, because who's going to count to 490 during forgiveness? I know some people who would count to 490, amen? And I'm sure some of you know some people like that too. Some of you might be people like that. I don't know. So, and going along with those numbers, something that's interesting, Lamech lived 777 years. That's in Genesis 5:31. So, take that for what it's worth. All right. So we kind of talked about what the process of forgiveness looks like. Okay. So we're going to look at a parable real quick, and this is the parable of a man owes a king millions of dollars. This is found just right after what we're reading. It's verses 23 through 34. And the man the king finds this out. I'll read it. How's that? Therefore, the kingdom of heaven can be compared to a king who decided to bring his accounts up to date with servants who had borrowed money from him. In the process, one of the debtors was brought in who owed him millions of dollars. The idea of the debt that was owed was a debt that he could not repay. That's what the idea of this debt was in the parable. He couldn't pay, so the master ordered that he be sold, along with his wife, his children, and everything he owned to repay the debt. But the man fell down before him and begged, "Please be patient with me. I will pay it all." Then the master was filled with pity for him, and he released him and forgave his debt. He didn't give him an extension, right? He forgave his debt. But when the man left the king, he went to a fellow servant who owed him a few $1,000s. Grabbed him by the throat, demanded instant payment. His fellow servant fell down before him and begged for a little more time. Please be patient with me, and I will pay it, he pleaded. But the creditor couldn't wait, and he had the man arrested and put in prison until the debt could be paid in full. When some of the other servants saw this, they were very upset, and they went to the king and told him everything that had happened. Then the king called the man that he had forgiven, and he said, "You evil servant, I forgave you that tremendous debt because you pleaded with me. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant as well, just as I had mercy on you?" Then the angry king sent the man to prison to be tortured until he had paid the entire debt. Okay? So that's the parable, right? That's an example of somebody being forgiven who was not forgiving and then was held accountable afterwards, right? So if you notice at the end of this, I've brought this up once before. At the end of verse 34, that he was tortured, he was put in prison and tortured until he paid the entire debt. Now remember, a few verses before, he was forgiven, right? He was forgiven that debt. But here, the debt has been reinstated and has been called for repayment. So what's the point of this? If we go to verse 35, now remember, these are Jesus' words. This isn't Peter recounting something that he thought Jesus meant. These are the words Jesus said. That's what the Heavenly Father will do to you if you refuse to forgive your brothers and sisters from your heart. So now you all know how to forgive when we go home, right? All right? But I bring this up because the weight of forgiveness is a heavy weight. And if we don't learn to deal with forgiveness in our own lives, it'll eat us up. Okay? Because me holding on to unforgiveness in against somebody else, if Roger does something against me, he wouldn't, but if he did, and I was angry at Roger, and I gave him the stink eye. Anybody ever had the stink eye? I see him in Walmart and I snub him. I see him at a stop sign and I cut in front of him. Right? Who's the one that's really in torment here? It's me. Roger's over there scratching his head. Man, what in the world has gotten into Lonny? He's like off his rocker or something, right? It is not the person that sinned against me who's being tormented by my unforgiveness. It is my own soul and my own heart and my own emotions and my own well-being. Um, Paul in Ephesians, he, he, uh, he makes a good point. It's good advice for every Christian. And it's Ephesians 4:32. And it says, be kind to each other, tender-hearted, forgiving one another just as God through Christ has forgiven you. Okay? Anywhere in that talk about when somebody comes to ask your forgiveness? They didn't ask. They didn't say they were sorry. Why am I going to forgive them? They didn't say they were sorry. They didn't admit what they did. Okay? Amy has talked about my propensity to, when something happens, I forgive it. As long as it isn't something that's going to cause major rifts down the road, right? There are times that, even after forgiveness, you have to deal with some things because there's going to be a rift. Remember that whole part B of the definition? It doesn't excuse them, right? But I'm going to forgive them because I don't want my relationship with my Heavenly Father to be hindered by a stupid choice that I make in relationship with somebody else. Okay? So, how do I forgive people? Somebody comes to my house and they do something against me, whatever that is. I find out they're telling lies about me. Let's just use that. Okay? I will hear it. I'll get upset at it. I'll wonder, what the world are they, where did this come from, right? But I'm going to forgive it. There may be a time that I have to go and I have to address it, right? That's part of the first part. Somebody did something against me that I have to forgive, but I have to go address it, right? But I will do the forgiveness before I even address it, because I don't want those things to get hold in me and take root. Okay? Anybody ever have a dandelion in their front yard? Now, let me rephrase this. Anybody ever have a yucca plant in their front yard? Anybody? Okay. So a yucca plant is this almost good for nothing plant. No, it's not good for nothing. It is this kind of woody, long-leafed plant that grows in arid regions typically. But one of our houses in Illinois, somebody had planted it in the right in the fence row, and it puts out a really beautiful spike with these big white flowers at the top of it for about 3 weeks, and then other than that, it's this ugly, prickly kind of long-tongued plant. Okay, Roger from Texas will know about these, right? Roger, how easy is it to eradicate a yucca? It is almost impossible. We thought, okay, we're just going to rip this thing out, and we'll put something that's pretty all year long in there, right? So I take a shovel and I start digging, and so this yucca plant's about this big. So I start digging, and I'm trying to get down. They have this taproot that's about as big as the plant, and it goes down about as tall as the plant. And then after that, it decides, you know what? One taproot isn't enough. I'm going to send out 80,000 more taproots to the rest of the yard. Okay? So when you think I've got this plant out, all of a sudden you have all of these tubers about this big around everywhere around you. And so you try and dig that. Those puppies don't just go as long as the plant is. I'm trying to think, how in the world do I get rid of this now? But I think, Roundup will kill anything. So I mixed up some Roundup and I sprayed each of those roots. I got it now. I covered it up and I put my my dirt back in and seeded grass in it. And that fall, guess what I had? 400 yuccas. Anybody that gardens around here that has, I'm trying to think what, we didn't have them as much in Nebraska. We had some nutsedge. It's kind of that grass plant that puts out this plume at the top, 3 plumes coming out. And it's a triangle-shaped leaf that grows straight up. Same thing. It just, you cut that out and 12 more come back, okay? That is what unforgiveness can do in your life. Because if you don't deal with it, by the time you do deal with it, you have all of these new little roots going to the rest of the parts of your life. And now every little offense instantly pops back up, this pre-rooted thing of unforgiveness. Because you've already trained yourself to not forgive. And so now every time you have to forgive when you're not used to it, it is hard. I got to rip that yucca out again. Next spring, I had to rip that yucca out again over and over and over. And so, what I do is I will forgive as instantly as I can. Because the longer I have room for it to live in my mind, I should have said, I could have said, I should have done. If he does that to me again, I'm gonna. Right? All those things that go on in your head. Sooner or later, gravity takes a hold of it, and it sinks 12 inches down to your heart. So the first thing I do is instantly forgive. Okay? But just like turning the kids that tie their shoe and they turn around, it can come untied just that fast. And so all of a sudden, you'll have a thought that'll creep in there. It'll say, hey, you know what you could do to get even? Right? Nobody ever has that happen, do they? Okay? So now I have to implement the verse, take every thought captive. And I have to recognize that this is that yucca trying to grow back its little leaves, and I got to snatch a hold of that puppy and rip it out and remind myself, no, I already forgave. Notice I didn't say I forgive them again, but I already forgave them. I have to remind myself, no, I already forgave. And so I have given up the right to do this the next time they do. And I throw that one away. And then I come back and they say, hey, next time you see them, you could do this to them to get even. Instantly again, I have to train myself to recognize that thought. I grab a hold of it and I say, no, I have forgiven them. That gives up my right for retribution, retaliation, and reimbursement. And I rip that puppy out. I've already forgiven them. This is the battle of the mind. This is working out our salvation. When we talk about when you're newly saved, you work out your salvation because our old habits die hard. Unforgiveness is an old habit. Okay. So here's a question for you. In the Lord's Prayer, we ask God to forgive us as we forgive others. Okay? That's Matthew 6:12. If you are forgiven as or like you forgive others, if you think about your current life and how you forgive others, the way I forgive it, as I forgive others or like I forgive others, how well is that going to work out for you? You don't have to answer, but give this some real thought. Forgive us this day our trespasses. Had to skip a couple of verses there. Forgive us our trespasses as or like we forgive those who trespass against us. So if I don't forgive very well, our Father in heaven is going to forgive us like or as we forgive others. And remember, this is also what Jesus said, right? Jesus, teach us to pray. Well, in that prayer, Father, forgive us as we forgive others. And again, in here, does that make any allowances for anybody else's fault in the situation? It doesn't say forgive us as we forgive those who confess their sins to us, right? It doesn't say that. It says forgive as you want to be forgiven. If you want God to forgive you freely, we've got to learn to forgive freely. Okay. So that's the forgiveness part that deals with me. Okay? So when do I determine that, man, I've got to talk to this person now? All right? I typically go and talk to people about something that has happened when it is a habit in their life and I see them perpetuating it to other people, others doing it to other people, or they're using the circumstance to stir up some kind of division, whether it's in church or with my friends, in the family, something along those lines, right? It's times like that require action. I've still forgiven them, but we gotta nip it in the bud, as Barney Fife would say. Gotta nip it in the bud, right? For any who are Andy Griffith lovers out there, which should be all of you. No. All right. Everybody that has a Bible, let's open up Colossians 3:13. Okay, and I want you to write this out on this sheet of paper. If you don't have a pen, there's some pens up in the prayer request buckets up here. Okay. Because this is a very interesting verse when it comes to our dealing with others. Give you just a minute to find it and write it. Fortunately, it's not like 12 sentences long. So. The book of Colossians, chapter 3, verse 13. If someone happens to not have either internet access or no Bible with them, I will start to read it out of the New Living. So, it says, make allowances for each other's faults, and forgive anyone. Who is anyone? Anyone is also everyone, in case you're curious, right? And forgive anyone who offends you. That's the first half of the verse. Make allowances for each other's faults and forgive anyone who offends you. And remember, this is the second half. Remember, the Lord forgave you, so you must forgive others. Okay? Again in here, is there any caveat put in there for people who don't admit what they did? There's no caveat in there that says once Once somebody confesses, then you have to forgive them. Okay? No mention of confession or a request to somebody for forgiveness. All right, the second question in here. Starting in verse 27. Then his master was filled with pity for him and released him and forgave his debt. Let's think about that word release, okay? I said at the beginning, we're going to come back to this at the end, okay? Think about that word release. How does true forgiveness release the offender? Let's have discussion on this. So, yeah. Okay. So, my my ability to hold them accountable, I give that up. It doesn't mean somebody else can't hold them accountable, right? And it also doesn't mean that depending on what happened, that the law isn't going to keep them accountable, right? People who have forgiven murderers for whatever acts that they did, but they still they do their time, whatever the justice determines they deserve, right? Um, I had a thought in the middle that I was gonna. Oh, I didn't hop on that thought soon enough. So it's anybody else. What do you think about when you think of releasing a person? Yep. Okay, so I'm free, right? The first side was we talked about if I release somebody, they're free. But now we don't think often the side that I'm free. Anybody ever have a giant dog, like a Great Dane or a Rottweiler or Saint Bernard? I mean, something that could pull your house off the foundation type dog, right? Yeah. Yeah, labs or okay. If you hook them up to a leash, people who say they take them for a walk are liars because it's the dog that takes them for the walk, right? So if I have a hold of that leash and that dog is walking me down the road, by releasing that dog, now I'm free from that dog. If I'm on a runaway horse and I jump off, I release that horse and I jump off, I'm free from that horse, right? I may be bound to the ground, but I'm free from the horse, okay? And so that feeling of freedom, just there's nothing like it, because if forgiveness is done right, then when Roger did that whatever terrible thing that he did to me was, when I look at him, I don't have to snub him at Walmart. I don't have to give him the stink eye. Because remember, our parents or our mothers always told us that your face will stick that way, right? So, um, so we talked about how true forgiveness can release the offender, right? That was earlier, and also the offended. Okay. So, in these last minutes, um, And I'll give the assignment to those who are on Facebook as well. But in these last minutes, we'll sign off from Facebook in a minute. I want you to take time, and I want you not to think, who do I need to forgive? Okay? Because that right away gets to step, 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 step. I want you to spend time in prayer and ask the Lord, Lord, why does it take me so long to forgive? Why do I have such a hard time? If this is something you struggle with, why do I hold on to things for so long? Okay, truly I mean, some people may not recognize how much that puts on your soul and on your emotions and on your sanity when if you give it up and you allow the Lord to take care of things. Well, he can do so much better to bring reconciliation, hopefully, right? Because that's the intended. Our happy flow was reconciliation. We're brought back together. Sometimes it doesn't happen, and I'm not going to say that's okay. But the Bible says, as long or as much as it depends on me, right? Live at peace with everyone. Sooner or later, if it doesn't depend on me, it depends on somebody else. I've done what I can do, right? So take a few minutes. We're gonna and just pray, Lord, show me why this is in my life. Because once we find out why, we can start addressing the how to get past that, and get on our way. Okay. So I'll pray before we say goodbye to Facebook. Lord, thank you so much for tonight. Lord, as we take these next